Medieval life wasn't just rough. It was powered by beliefs so absurd you'll swear they came from a comedy sketch. In this video, you'll hear 44 real things medieval peasants truly believed, from sky pirates stealing crops to fireproof lizards and vegetables possessed by demons. Think you've seen dumb? Just wait. 1. The vegetable lamb of Tartary is the undisputed champion of medieval confusion because smart people genuinely thought sheep grew on trees like fruit. Before they understood the biology of cotton, they decided that the white fluff on bushes must come from tiny lambs that grew out of the plant on a stalk. They believed a little sheep dangled from the branch by its belly button and grazed on the grass in a circle until it ate everything it could reach. It is hilarious to think that their best scientific explanation for a cotton shirt was that nature created a woolly animal designed to hang from a stick and graze until it starved. Honestly, how much cider were they drinking when they wrote their botany textbooks? 2. If you felt sick in the Middle Ages, the doctor would not check your blood pressure but would instead perform a taste test on your urine. This was a standard medical procedure called uroscopy, where a physician would hold a flask of your urine up to the light like a sommelier examining a fine wine. After looking at the color, they would often take a sip to check the flavor, believing the taste could tell them if you had diabetes or a fever. It is absolutely wild to think that the most respected medical professionals of the time were walking around drinking samples from their patients to give a diagnosis. You have to admire their dedication to the job, even if their methods were disgusting. 3. We complain about bad weather, but medieval peasants truly believed that storms were actually a coordinated heist run by sky pirates from a magical land called Magonia. They were convinced that sailors navigated invisible ships through the clouds just to lower their anchors and steal wheat and wine from the fields below. When a big storm hit, the farmers would not run for cover. They would run out and yell at the sky to stop the cloud sailors from loading their stolen cargo. It is absolutely hilarious that they looked at a thunderstorm and decided it was not a weather pattern, but a drive-by looting operation committed by a clumsy crew of floating thieves who were bad at parking their boats. 4. If you were being chased by a tiger in the Middle Ages, travelers' lore claimed you just needed to throw a glass mirror at it. The belief was that tigers were incredibly narcissistic and stupid parents. So the mother tiger would look at her own reflection in the glass, think it was her baby cub, and stop to nurse it. The hunter could then just casually walk away, while the apex predator was busy trying to babysit a shiny ball. It is easily the most ridiculous escape plan ever invented, relying entirely on the tiger having an identity crisis in the middle of a hunt. 5. Medieval people were absolutely convinced that elephants had no knees and could not bend their legs at all. They believed these giant animals walked around on stiff stilts like wooden tables and had to sleep by leaning against big trees because if they ever lay down on the ground, they would never be able to get back up. It paints a hilarious picture of the animal kingdom where the strongest creature on earth could be defeated simply by tipping it over like a cow. It is wild to think that nobody noticed an elephant bending its leg for over 1,000 years of history. 6. You might think eating vegetables is safe, but medieval peasants genuinely believed that lettuce was a favorite hiding spot for demons. There was a widespread story recorded by church leaders about a nun who ate a piece of lettuce without making the sign of the cross and immediately swallowed a demon that was sitting on the leaf. When they tried to exorcise the spirit, the demon actually complained that it was not his fault, because he was just minding his own business sitting on a vegetable when he got eaten. It shows a level of paranoia where even a healthy lunch could turn into a spiritual emergency if you forgot to bless your salad before taking a bite. 7. Going to the doctor was a risky gamble because people thought cavities were caused by a literal monster known as the toothworm. They did not blame sugar or poor hygiene. They believed a tiny worm had crawled into their mouth and was digging a tunnel inside their tooth like a miner. The doctors would try to lure the worm out with honey or smoke it out with herbs, treating a dental problem like a pest control operation in your face. It is hard to believe anyone survived this era when the medical diagnosis for a sore jaw was that you had a tiny angry snake living in your gums that needed to be evicted immediately. 8. Medieval biology was basically a magic show because everyone from peasants to kings believed in the concept of spontaneous generation. They were convinced that mice were not born from other mice but were magically created when you left dirty laundry and wheat in a dark corner for a few weeks. The logic was that the smell of sweat and old grain would swirl together and suddenly, poof, you have a fully formed rodent family. They applied this to everything, thinking that mud at the bottom of a river turned into frogs and rotting meat turned into flies. You'd think someone would test this, but apparently not. They just assumed garbage had superpowers. 9. Religious fasting rules were strict, but medieval people found the greatest loophole in history with the barnacle goose. They desperately wanted to eat meat during Lent, but were only allowed to eat fish, so they decided that this specific goose was actually a seafood product. The belief was that these birds did not hatch from eggs, but grew on driftwood in the ocean like barnacles and then dropped into the water. Since they were born from the sea, logic dictated they were technically fish with feathers. It is the most impressive mental gymnastics ever performed just to eat a roast dinner on a Friday without feeling guilty about breaking the rules. 10. If you think snakes are scary, medieval people had the ultimate free life hack to defeat them, which was just getting fully naked. They seriously believed that snakes were morally outraged by human nudity and would flee in terror if you took your clothes off. The logic was that the reptile had too much social anxiety to handle a naked peasant running through the woods. It paints a hilarious picture of hiking safety where the recommended defense against a viper was not a stick or a rock, but simply flashing the wildlife and watching them slither away in pure embarrassment. It really makes you wonder how many people tried to streak their way out of a snake bite. 11. We all know unicorns are fake, but medieval rich people spent absolute fortunes buying what they thought were magical unicorn horns. In reality, slick traders were selling them the tusks of narwhals, which are just swimming whales with a long tooth, but the nobles had no idea what a whale was. They believed these horns could purify water and neutralize poison, so kings would literally drink from a whale's tooth, hoping it would save them from assassination. It is the most expensive scam in history, where the wealthy elite were sipping wine out of sea creature dental work and bragging about their magical protection. 12. Biology classes would have been wild because everyone believed that mother bears gave birth to shapeless lumps of meat instead of cubs. The theory was that a baby bear was born as a featureless blob of goo without eyes or legs, looking like a hairy gummy bear. The mother bear then had to spend days licking the lump to physically mold it into the shape of a proper animal, which is where we get the phrase licking into shape. It is hilarious to think they believed bears were basically sculptors who had to assemble their children manually, like a DIY project immediately after birth. 13. Military strategy was different back then because medieval bestiaries described a creature called the Botanical that fought with chemical warfare. They believed this bull-like animal had horns that curled inward so it could not gore anyone, so its only defense was to shoot acidic dung out of its rear end at high speeds. The books claimed this burning manure could cover 3 acres and was so toxic it burned anything it touched. It is absolutely hysterical that knights were terrified of a cow whose superpower was essentially having an explosive stomachache directed at its enemies. 14. Goats are weird animals, but medieval scholars repeated that they were basically aliens that defied all laws of anatomy. A very popular belief written by respected Roman scholars and believed for centuries was that goats breathe through their ears instead of their noses. They were convinced that if you plugged a goat's ears with wax, the poor thing would suffocate and die instantly. It is absolutely mind-blowing that farmers who worked with goats every single day never noticed the animal using its actual nose to breathe. They just looked at those floppy ears and decided, yep, those are definitely lungs. 15. Sailors are superstitious, but the dumbest maritime rule was that garlic was the ultimate enemy of navigation. There was a genuine belief that the smell of garlic was so powerful it could physically destroy the magnetic field of a compass. Captains would ban sailors from eating garlic near the ship's equipment, fearing that one bad breath would demagnetize the needle and send the boat crashing into rocks. It is hilarious to think that they were not afraid of storms or pirates as much as they were afraid of a cook using too much seasoning and accidentally erasing their only way home. 16. Birds were apparently the inventors of the alarm clock because people believed cranes ran a military-style night shift. The myth was that while the flock slept, one guard crane would stand on one leg and hold a heavy stone in the other foot. The logic was that if the guard fell asleep, its claw would relax, dropping the rock on its own foot and waking it up immediately. It is a funny image of a bird so dedicated to its job that it willingly set up a system to smash its own toes just to avoid taking an accidental nap on the job. 17. Sailors famously love making excuses, but medieval sailors were taught that a tiny fish called the remora could stop a massive ship dead in the water. They thought this little 6-inch fish had the magical strength to latch onto the hull of a giant galley and physically hold it back against the wind and the rowing of 100 men. If a ship was late to port, the captain would not blame the weather or his bad navigation. He would just shrug and say a small fish grabbed the boat. It is the ultimate "my dog ate my homework" excuse for grown men at sea. 18. You probably think bees are insects, but medieval bestiaries were absolutely convinced that bees were actually tiny holy birds that came from paradise. They believed these little guys were the smallest birds in existence and were so incredibly religious that they never slept and hummed hymns to themselves while they worked. The monks even taught that bees were too pure to reproduce naturally, so they just magically found their babies on flowers like a buzzing scavenger hunt. It is adorable that they looked at a stinging insect and decided it was actually a microscopic feathered angel that went to church every Sunday. 19. If you saw a hedgehog in a garden, you would think it is cute. But medieval farmers believed they were tactical fruit thieves running an organized heist. The widespread belief was that hedgehogs would climb up grapevines, shake the fruit down to the ground, and then roll on top of the grapes to impale them on their spines. They would then walk away looking like a walking shish kebab to feed their families. It is a cartoonish image where they turned a clumsy little animal into a master criminal capable of harvesting an entire vineyard using just its back. 20. People were obsessed with fire safety, and they truly believed that the salamander was a magical lizard that was completely fireproof. They thought these little guys were so cold by nature that they could live inside a bonfire and actually extinguish the flames just by walking on them. Merchants even sold clothes made of asbestos, claiming it was salamander wool that could not be burned. It is wild that they looked at a small lizard and decided its superpower was being a living fire extinguisher that could be sheared like a sheep to make flame-resistant sweaters. 21. We know ostriches are birds, but medieval bestiaries claimed they were basically garbage disposals that ate solid iron for breakfast. People believed that ostriches had such powerful stomachs that they could digest horseshoes nails and metal keys as part of their regular diet. Illustrations from the time often show ostriches standing around casually eating a sword or a horseshoe like it was a pretzel. And honestly, what were they imagining? A bird built like a medieval vending machine that ran on spare metal parts? 22. Gardening was considered a high-risk activity because of the mandrake root, which people believed was a plant that looked like a little human. The myth was that if you pulled a mandrake out of the ground, it would let out a scream so horrible that anyone who heard it would instantly drop dead or go insane. To harvest it safely, they had to stuff their ears with wax and use elaborate tricks to pull the root out without being close to it. It makes you wonder how much they hated weeding if they invented a vegetable that literally yells at you until you pass out. 23. Geology was apparently a romantic subject because people believed that diamonds were living creatures that had a gender and could have babies. The theory was that if you took 2 diamonds and left them alone in a dark box for a few years, they would eventually reproduce and create smaller baby diamonds. Rich people would check their jewelry boxes, hoping their stones had started a family so they could get richer without doing any work. It is purely wishful thinking where they tried to apply the birds and the bees logic to hard rocks just to save money on buying new gems. 24. Farmers had a bizarre love-hate relationship with the lynx because they thought its urine was liquid money. The belief was that lynx pee would instantly harden into a precious gemstone called lincurium, which could be sold for a fortune. The funny part is they thought the lynx knew its pee was valuable and would spitefully bury it deep underground just so humans could not get rich. It creates a ridiculous image of people stalking wild cats in the forest, waiting for a bathroom break, only to get outsmarted by a feline that was hoarding its own toilet treasures like a greedy dragon. 25. Bird migration is a basic concept today, but medieval logic decided that swallows actually spent the winter underwater. Instead of flying south to warm countries, people genuinely believed that these birds dove into ponds and rivers to hibernate in the mud at the bottom alongside frogs and fish. Fishermen would tell stories about pulling up nets filled with sleeping birds instead of pike. It is hilarious that they looked at a bird, which is designed for flying, and decided its winter vacation home was a freezing cold swamp at the bottom of a lake. 26. If you saw a toad in the garden, you might run away, but a medieval peasant would try to check its head for a magical gemstone called a toadstone. They believed that inside the head of every ugly toad was a beautiful jewel that could cure poisons and warn you of danger by getting hot. People were obsessed with finding these stones, believing that nature apologized for making the toad so bumpy by hiding a lottery ticket inside its skull. It is just wild that they thought the key to wealth was inspecting the forehead of a slime-covered amphibian. 27. Eating dinner used to be a religious minefield because people genuinely believed that using a fork was an insult to God. When forks were first introduced, priests and commoners alike were outraged, arguing that God gave humans fingers for a reason and using a metal tool to touch your food was arrogant and sinful. They actually mocked people who use forks as being too soft to touch their own meat. It is funny to think there was a time when eating with your hands was considered the holy option, and using cutlery was seen as a one-way ticket to the underworld. 28. Diet culture was out of control because everyone believed the chameleon was a creature that survived by eating nothing but air. Since they never saw chameleons eating large prey, they assumed these lizards just opened their mouths and absorbed the wind for nutrition. This belief was so strong that chameleons became symbols of people who lived on empty promises. It is a hilarious biological hot take where they decided an animal's entire meal plan was just taking a deep breath and staying full for the rest of the week. 29. Rabbits are famous for multiplying, but medieval biology claimed that hares could actually change their gender every single year. They believed that a hare would be a male one year and then magically transform into a female the next year, flipping back and forth its whole life. It was their only explanation for why there were so many bunnies running around so fast. At this point, I'm not even judging them. I'm impressed by the creativity. 30. Telling the time was difficult before watches, but peasants believed they could just look into a cat's eyes to see the future of the ocean. It was widely believed that the pupils of a cat's eyes would grow larger or smaller, in perfect sync with the phases of the moon and the ocean tides. Sailors would genuinely inspect the family pet to figure out if the tide was high or low. It is absurd to think they treated a house cat like a furry biological clock that was wirelessly connected to the moon's gravity. 31. Everyone likes gold, but travel books claimed that in distant lands there were ants the size of dogs that guarded massive piles of gold dust. The story said these giant bugs were faster than horses and would chase away anyone who tried to steal their treasure. It shows just how gullible people were, believing that insects could grow to the size of a golden retriever just to stop the economy from inflating. 32. Thunderstorms are scary, but the medieval fire department consisted entirely of ringing church bells. People truly believed that thunder and lightning were caused by evil spirits playing games in the clouds, and the only way to stop them was to make a loud, holy noise. During a storm, the job of the bell ringer was to pull the rope as hard as possible to scare the cloud demons away with the sound. It is funny to imagine a town's official weather defense strategy was just making as much noise as humanly possible until the rain stopped. 33. Healthcare was a complete lottery because people genuinely believed the king could cure diseases just by touching you. This was known as the royal touch, and thousands of sick peasants would line up for days just to get a hand laid on them. Yes, a literal royal high five. The logic was that since the king was chosen by God, his hands were basically magical medical instruments. It is funny to imagine a healthcare system where the doctor does not give you medicine but just pokes you on the forehead and says, you are good to go. 34. If you have ever said God bless you, after a sneeze you are following a medieval panic protocol because they thought sneezing ejected your soul. The common belief was that a violent sneeze threw your soul out of your body for a split second, leaving you completely empty and vulnerable. They were terrified that in that brief moment, a demon could jump down your throat and take over the driver's seat. It is a hilarious level of paranoia where a simple allergy attack was treated like a spiritual emergency that required immediate prayers to keep your ghost inside your chest. 35. Travelers were gullible tourists who believed that in hot countries there lived a race of one-legged men called ceopods. Medieval maps and church carvings showed these people having one gigantic foot that was so big they could lie on their backs and use it as a parasol to shade themselves from the sun. It shows that medieval people really thought evolution would design a human being to look like a biological beach chair just to deal with a sunburn. 36. Cooking butter is annoying work, but medieval farmers believed that if the cream did not churn, it was because a witch was hiding in the bucket. They did not blame temperature or fat content. They blamed a mischievous spirit that was holding the butter back. The accepted solution was to take a hot iron horseshoe and drop it into the cream to burn the witch, or simply beat the bucket with a stick to drive the demon out. It paints a funny picture of a dairy farmer screaming at a bucket of milk and hitting it with a switch, hoping to scare it into becoming butter. 37. The animal kingdom was confusing, but nothing beats the belief in the cockatrice, which was a monster born from the worst parenting duo ever. They believed this deadly beast hatched from an egg laid by a male rooster and then incubated by a toad. The result was a chicken-snake hybrid that could kill people just by looking at them. It is wild that they looked at a chicken coop and worried that if a rooster got confused and a toad got involved, the result would be a laser-eyed dragon that would terrorize the village. 38. Silence is golden, but medieval people believed that wolves had the magical power to steal your voice before you could even scream. The legend said that if a wolf saw you before you saw the wolf, you would physically lose the ability to speak or shout for help. You would just stand there, opening your mouth with no sound coming out until the wolf left. It is a terrifying but ridiculous idea that a predator did not need to attack you. It just had to win a staring contest to put your vocal cords on mute mode. 39. Being left-handed today is just a minor inconvenience with scissors, but in the Middle Ages it was considered proof that you were best friends with the devil. The word sinister actually comes from the Latin word for left, and people believed that the left side was reserved for evil spirits. If you tried to write with your left hand, priests and teachers would panic, thinking you were channeling dark magic through your pen. It is wild to think that simply holding a spoon in the wrong hand was seen as a spiritual crisis that required an immediate intervention. 40. We use the word lunatic to describe crazy behavior, but medieval doctors used it literally to diagnose people who slept under the moon. They believed that the moon was a giant humid sponge that dripped moisture into the brains of anyone who fell asleep outside at night. The logic was that your brain would get too soggy from the moon rays, and you would wake up mentally scrambled, like your brain left the oven too long. It is funny that their explanation for mental health issues was basically that you forgot to wear a hat, and your brain got wet from looking at the sky. 41. Biology was a free-for-all where peasants believed that eels were not born from eggs but were actually transformed horse hairs. The common belief was that if a hair from a horse's tail fell into a drinking trough or a river, it would magically come to life and turn into a slippery eel. Just add water, apparently. Farmers would swear they saw it happen, watching a strand of hair wiggle in the water and deciding it had just gained a soul. It shows a level of imagination where they thought a horse was basically a vending machine for creating fish if you just waited long enough. 42. Crocodiles are terrifying predators, but medieval bestiaries turned them into emotional manipulators with the myth of crocodile tears. People believed that crocodiles felt intense guilt after eating a human and would sit on the riverbank sobbing real tears out of pure sadness. But the twist was that they only cried to trick kind-hearted people into coming closer to comfort them, so they could eat them too. It is a hilarious concept that turns a dinosaur-like reptile into a drama queen that uses fake crying to lure in its dinner. 43. War is usually serious, but medieval illustrated manuscripts described an eternal battle happening every year between the pygmies and the cranes. People believed that a race of tiny men who were only 1 cubit tall lived in the mountains and had to organize a full military campaign every winter to fight off migrating birds. Illustrations show these little guys riding goats into battle, armed with tiny spears to defend their crops from the birds. It is like a cartoon come to life where the biggest threat to national security was a flock of angry birds looking for a snack. 44. We look up at the sky and see space. But church-approved scholars taught that the universe was basically a giant onion made of crystal. They believed the Earth was the center of everything and was surrounded by invisible solid glass spheres that held the stars and planets in place. They thought that if you could fly high enough, you would eventually smack your head against a solid glass ceiling that separated us from heaven. It is the perfect ending to their logic, believing that we were all just living inside a giant fancy snow globe that someone forgot to shake. And that's the worldview millions lived by: superstition, fear, and logic that collapses under a gentle poke. Now here's the question I dare you to answer. Which modern belief will people 500 years from now roast us for the same way we're roasting the Middle Ages today? Drop your pick in the comments. The spicier, the better. And if you want more history that makes your brain scream, "No way this was real," hit like and subscribe. More madness is coming.